So Lisa mentioned briefly who we are, who CFLeads is. Um, we were created in response to uh, a publication put out by a group called the Monitor Institute that was trying to navigate forces in the United States that were making it challenging for community foundations to really thrive and succeed. They recommended 3 shifts that community foundations make in their practice. And those 3 recommendations were trying to move from institution to community, from the accumulation of long-term assets under management to long-term leadership, and from being competitive in their desire to lead impact to coordinated impact. So understanding that not one institution has the ability to try to affect the type of change that they want to make in community by themselves. And a group of chief executive officers, CEOs from across the United States who were working in this way kind of came together to form CFLeads in response to that. And what was commonplace at the time, and probably was still up until about 7 or 8 years ago, was that many folks equated their impact with the amount of assets that they had under management. What they wanted to be clear on was that they didn't feel impact was equated to assets, that even smaller community foundations still have the ability to advance significant change, even if they have fewer assets to kind of give out to community organizations and trying to drive change.
Len, if I could jump in there just as a language piece in Spanish. So assets is the amount of money that you have in investments as a community foundation. And often times in the United States and Canada, community foundations are or compare themselves according to the size of their assets or the size of the amount of their endowment that is in the bank.
And in that comparison, they would feel like if I was a much larger community foundation, and I was at a national gathering, and you were a smaller community foundation, people often felt they didn't have things, they couldn't learn from someone who was smaller, that they needed to engage community foundations of similar size. And that just hasn't been the case over time. And so what they really wanted to emphasize was that impact was really about trying to support better community outcomes. And that can be done with a variety of asset size and community partners. And so underscoring that, they created this definition for what they meant by community leadership. And so I'll just read it quickly off the slide. The community foundation is a community partner that creates a better future for all by pursuing the community's greatest opportunities and addressing the most critical challenges, inclusively uniting people, institutions, and resources from throughout the community and producing significant, widely shared and lasting results. And so you'll see, I just want to kind of lift up a couple aspects. The main one is that the focus on inclusively uniting people, institutions, and resources. You'll notice that really you can see financial resources within the word resources, but otherwise it's really how do community foundations activate and unite, bring together people, other institutions. Rebecca mentioned briefly from Buenos Aires, talking about how these 3 kind of community organizations are coming together to form a community foundation. That's kind of precisely right. What community leadership is about is uniting those people and institutions to create change in place. And then lastly, it really speaks to those lasting results, that impact is about those longer term, better community outcomes. And so CFLeads came together, I think, in 2007. In 2009, they launched the framework for community leadership by a community foundation. And you'll see in this image, we call this the compass, the community leadership compass. And it's the variety of resources that we work with the field to help support their community leadership activities. The most outward ring, the light blue ring, where you'll see values, culture, and will, relationships, understanding and skills and resources. Those are the four main building blocks of the framework for community leadership. The next circle inward is what we've come to call the 5 core competencies of community leadership, which is around engaging residents, working across sectors, shaping public policy, marshaling resources, and sharing local data. And then the most inward circle section of the compass is the work of going all in, which we released in 2020, right, Melody? I believe.
2020, when did COVID start? 2021, I think we published.
2021. And so this was, and we'll speak briefly on it in a minute. It was a survey of the field to get a sense of where they were currently in the work. It wasn't necessarily a response or a part 2 of the publication that I mentioned briefly that really caused kind of the creation of CFLeads. But it was a snapshot in time to get a sense what the field in the United States was working on. And so these 3 areas that they identified were insisting on racial equity, amplifying community voice, and influencing public policy and systems. And so all of CFLeads' work is to help support community foundations kind of working with this compass. We kind of start where grant making ends. It's important to be a good grant maker, but we feel it's not necessarily sufficient to advance the kind of change that they're trying to advance in their communities. And so this, just as a reminder, these were the 5 core competencies that I touched on. Really engaging resident voice in the work so that it helps kind of shape the future for the community. And not doing to someone, but engaging them in kind of a co-creative process. The next is around data. Some community foundations do their own research or they commission reports, but really understanding your local data to help inform solutions, potential policy solutions, working across sectors. Again, understanding that third recommendation that publication offered the field was to move from competition to coordinated impact. And so working across sectors really allows folks to be able to work in alignment and in coordination to affect community outcomes. Shaping policy and systems, and then marshaling resources, understanding that financial assets and money is important. They couldn't do the work without it, but also understanding that a community foundation's money that they have is not nearly enough to support the kind of work that needs to happen in community. So they need to marshal resources from other sources, be it the federal government or other funding partners. And so again, these were the 3 areas of momentum that the Going All In report surfaced for us. We gathered this information through survey with an organization called Candid and CF Insights in the United States. The responses they received varied from whatever part of a country someone was in, whether it was more populated or rural and more sparsely populated. It had a good kind of spread or a collection of asset size, so larger foundations, smaller foundations. It was also, we added additional 24 or so interviews with folks and from across the field to help kind of supplement the survey data. And these were the areas of momentum that were identified: insisting on racial equity, amplifying community voice, and influencing public policy and systems. And so I mentioned just a little bit ago the framework for community leadership by a community foundation. And again, these are the four main building blocks. We call these the first level building blocks. And it's about the values, culture, and will of an organization, that the community foundation manifests the values, culture, and will to exercise community leadership. The second column, B, is focused on the relationships necessary. So the community foundation continuously builds the relationships to exercise community leadership. C is about the resources. The community foundation assesses and develops the resources necessary to exercise community leadership. And then lastly, around the understanding and skills. The community foundation accesses and develops in their staff and in their board the understanding and skills to exercise community leadership. Each of these first level building blocks are then followed by kind of a deeper dive into that area with additional what we call second level building blocks. And then even deeper into the framework, there's a collection of questions that are within each of those second level building blocks, which we call third level building blocks. So this can kind of get confusing, but you kind of come down in elevation or depth of a topical area to really start to understand what it takes to become a stronger community leader, and what we see as necessary to really create kind of long-term impact in community. And this was updated in 2013 after we held a resident engagement panel. And so they added additional building blocks across each column that really focused on and surfaced resident voice in the work. And we see this framework as the internal functioning of a community foundation, which allows them to then do the work externally that they aspire to do. And so today we're going to really kind of focus in on just two building blocks and how they are connected to the community leadership assessment tool, which we'll get to in just a moment. So just for reference, we'll be kind of using as examples those highlighted boxes in A and D. The community foundation is of, by, and for the community it serves. And then the community foundation has the skills to help residents and other stakeholders be involved in and drive community efforts. So just a little bit about the community leadership assessment tool. This too was, I think it was initially created in 2020, but then had an update in 2021. And this is another way to evaluate, assess an institution's community leadership effectiveness. Typically, when I do work with the cohorts that I work with, the group of CEOs or vice presidents, we assess their organizations with that framework for community leadership, using a scale of 1 to 3, essentially. Or we use dots that are yellow, green, and red to kind of depict where they are on their journey. This is an assessment tool that allows for kind of greater granularity and has greater, I think, language to define where an organization is on the spectrum. And so this was organized kind of to be in alignment with the framework for community leadership. It has the sections that are directly connected to the building blocks that we talked about. So it talks about the organizational culture and the values, the relationships, the resources, and the understanding and skills, and really gets down into issues of understanding the role of power, of of race, of marginalized populations, also other aspects of the framework. And so just as an example of how these might work together, and David Rosado at the time, who is now with the Council on Foundations, was at Candid and CF Insights, and we did a what we called a crosswalk. We looked at our framework for community leadership, we looked at the community leadership assessment tool, and then connected these measures from the assessment tool to the framework, and then back again. And so you'll see in this example that this is under resources and diverse representation. And in parentheses next to it, it says, see the framework building blocks A2 and A3. And so we hope that institutions and staff can kind of move back and forth between these two resources to help make their practice more effective and create more impact in community. And so this again is the example that we pulled from the framework earlier, that the Community Foundation is of, by, and for the community it serves. And so you'll see the language, and we built this from the example of the Ford Foundation's organizational mapping tool that I believe they have used in the past with social justice organizations that they have funded. And so the scale of 1 to 7 was borrowed from their assessment tool. And so just so we can walk through this as an example, the minimal, at the first level here of diverse representation, it says board, staff, volunteers, vendors, and others are drawn from a limited pool and have little relevant experience and do not include underserved communities. The basic level, which we have connected to 3, is board, staff, volunteers, vendors, and others are drawn from a small range of fields, and some have relevant experience. There is minimal representation of people from underserved communities. The 5th position on the scale is board, staff, volunteers, vendors, and others are drawn from several appropriate fields and include representation from underserved communities. Most have some relevant experience. And then on the 7th position of the scale, board, staff, volunteers, vendors, and others are drawn from a wide variety of appropriate fields. Underserved communities are well represented. Members have extensive experience and practice and expertise. So you can get a sense of how this might support greater more depth and effectiveness in practice. And so this is what I am starting to use with our community foundation partners within my leadership programs, is I'm asking them to complete this assessment tool so that they can have a baseline to see where they might improve, what how they might become more effective in their community leadership practice. And I can pause to see if there are any questions, Lisa, or I can move right on to the next example. You're on mute.
Are there any questions about this example and how it could be used?
We will have another opportunity for questions as well in a bit. I just wanted to pause real quickly. Okay. So the second example is around understanding kind of the coordination among networks, and that the foundation has the skills and engaging other stakeholders in improvement efforts from the framework. And so again, I'll just walk through briefly the language that is within the assessment tool. On the first point on the scale, the foundation does little work to coordinate and collaborate among stakeholders. in parentheses, community members, policymakers, and/or business that support community improvement. The second level up there on basic, the third point on the scale, the foundation has a sense of how to coordinate and collaborate among stakeholders that support community improvement, but rarely does so. Moderate, the fifth level, is the foundation understands how to coordinate and collaborate among stakeholders that support community improvement and often facilitate or are involved in such processes. And then the seventh, under strong, is the foundation helps to ensure coordination, collaboration among stakeholders that support community improvement, and when necessary, works to reform or strengthen those systems. And so I think,
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I think there are probably areas within this assessment tool that community foundations, where you are, and the way that you have advanced your practice are probably further ahead than many community foundations in the United States. But we think this could be a useful tool to help support you in your work. And so I'll pass it to you, Lisa, to see if there are any more questions from all that I've said before you wanted to move into breakouts.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Len. So we do want to open this up for questions. Do you want to take?
Do you want me to stop sharing?
Stop sharing. Somebody might have a question about a specific slide. We can always go back to it, and for the breakout rooms, we'll want to put that up for those questions. But I'm really curious about first reactions about this leadership model and as an assessment tool. Do you have questions for Len about how it's been used, changes that they've made over time? Anything that you'd like to ask before going into breakout rooms and talking about it? And you can ask in English or Spanish, doesn't matter. Minerva.
Hi, thank you. That was very interesting and made me think a lot about the things that we've been doing, because Comunalia has sort of been working on a similar assessment tool to then guide the work that we're doing with the community foundations in terms of strengthening and capacity building and whatnot. So a couple of the things is when you came up with all these scales and these dimensions, was that a collaborative effort with the community foundations? And two, sort of, do you give them the aggregate data of where they can find themselves compared to other communities? Like, how do they have access to the information after they've filled out the questionnaire?
So really good questions. The original framework for community leadership was, like that building block we focused of by and for. That was community foundation leaders at the time. It was built from their practice, their best practice or promising practices at the time. And as I mentioned, in 2013, we updated that framework to include resident voice. That was a kind of a glaring gap in the content within the framework. And so that was a collaborative effort with community foundations. The assessment tool was pulled together from funding from a private foundation in the United States called CS Mott. They supported Candid and CF Insights to produce a community leadership assessment tool, because there had been this gap in how kind of community foundations have made sense of their work. I mentioned at the front end that impact does not equal assets. That really has been historically what community foundations report on, our asset size and the number of grants we make. And so there was a real call from the field and a yearning to try to get another way to kind of think about how we can measure ourselves and the work that we do. And so this is kind of filling that gap. We worked closely with David Rosado at Candid and CF Insights at the time. They were working with a consultant to kind of help shape the language and identify those measures that were in alignment with the framework. And then once we had kind of a draft model, we tested it with, I think at least 5 to 10 people to get their feedback, mostly from probably within the vice president level, who are probably have a greater sense to a certain degree of the foundation's work in various aspects. And then once we got that feedback, we then made adjustments and tested it with a few more and had them actually take the survey.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
And so that's how that was created.
Just to get an idea, how long was that process?
I think we started in 2019, and I think had probably early 2019, and around October, I think we had a webinar that kind of released it to the field. And as part of that conversation, he was the vice president at the time. He's now risen to CEO at the Rochester Area Community Foundation in New York State. He actually planned to use some of the measures with community to get their sense of what the community foundation is doing. So I think Lisa, you may have said how they're using it. Some community foundations are using the assessment tool to help guide strategic planning efforts, to try to, you think, where should they be, or how should they go about their work to be in 5 years. Others are maybe using portions of the assessment tool to engage community and get their input into their work. Once an individual fills out the assessment, taking it makes it sound like it's a test. It's not a test. It's just and it's non-judgmental. It's just to get an understanding of where you are currently in your practice. They get a link sent out. This is how it used to work, as a PDF file of what the results were. And then David would manually pull out. So say one community foundation wanted all their staff and all their board members and trustees to take the assessment. And we've had a few that have done that. He would aggregate all of the staff results, have individual results and their averages, and then have all of the board members, their individual results and averages. And then I'm not sure how he would reflect that back to them. For participants in my cohorts, I ask everyone now to complete it, and he sends me in a spreadsheet and the raw scores of individuals that don't have any identifiers to them, so I don't know who it is, but gives me their individual scores and their average, so then we can have a conversation as a cohort. So they first do the framework assessment, and then either in the second meeting or the third meeting of their cohort time with me, we do this assessment, which opens up, I think, new and different conversations. So now we are actually, Candid and CF Insights has transferred ownership of the tool to us. And so we are going through the process of transferring the tool to SurveyMonkey. And then we'll need to figure out how we reflect results back to folks. But I think we'll start using it in a way that we can see where challenges might be in some of the work. There's a lot of people have a lot of challenges with policy or business model. Business model being, how do we support the work? A lot of community foundations in the United States have what are called donor advised funds. So individuals will give and create a fund at the foundation, and the foundation will charge a fee to manage those dollars, and that fee will help to cover operations. And so that's often a real challenging, because some are are much more heavily focused on donor advised funds. Some are much more modest and don't have that kind of fee structure to support their operations. So I think it'll allow us as a philanthropy serving organization to be more targeted in how we can support community foundations in their work.
Thank you, Minerva, for those
Yeah,
questions.
it was great.
Does anyone else have questions about the tool itself or the framework?
I think this is a
Ay,
great
perdón,
discussion
a mí sí
for
me
us.
gustaría
Oh,
hacer una
go ahead.
pregunta.
Ujú.
Len, voy a hablar en español.
Ujú.
Primero agradecerte toda la aportación y este panorama que nos presentas. Y considero que, o me gustaría saber cómo está considerado el sistema relacional, ¿no? De todo esto, si bien es una herramienta que se está usando, ¿no? Y la usan a nivel interno las fundaciones. Desde lo que he observado también hay mucha información, cómo lo perciben o cómo lo viven, ¿no? Como las organizaciones o los grupos con los que trabajan las fundaciones y complementan mucho de la mirada, ¿no? De la percepción. Que dicen cómo he vivido, ¿no? Es el relacionamiento con la fundación y demás. Saber si en algún momento está considerada la participación, ¿no? De complementar, digamos, esta visión sistémica desde también otro principal elemento, ¿no? Que son los protagonistas en todo esta, pues en esta dinámica relacional. No, me gustaría saber medio ahorita como curiosidad esa parte. Gracias.
Circe, are you referring to whether the organizations in local organizations are also contributing to this work?
Sí, sí hay como la intención o se complementa, ¿no? Esta visión de decir, bueno, estamos realizando de esta manera, ¿no? El liderazgo comunitario, cómo lo recibe también la otra parte del sistema, ¿no? Que recibe o se involucra con las fundaciones. O sea, me parece interesante, ¿no? Cómo se complementa entonces esa gran visión. Ha pasado observado que algunas veces la percepción de la fundación es una, y cuando se trabaja con las personas de la comunidad perciben cosas diferentes, algunas coincidencias sí, y es bien interesante y muy rico, ¿no? Que decía la fundación, oye, no habíamos visto esto, lo estamos justo observando ahora, ¿no? Con esto que comenta, y ha sido como muy rico también, esos descubrimientos en ambos sentidos.
It's a great question. I know that many community foundation participants, staff, and in the programs that I have led have done both of the assessments, so the framework for community leadership and the assessment tool with their staff and their board. And so understanding that boards of directors for community foundations in the United States are often made up of other community leaders within the kind of the system or the ecosystem within that geography. I think they then come to understand how that might all fit together and see it more in a systems way, if that makes sense. Some community foundations also don't use the language of community leadership. They might use civic leadership. And so I think it's hard for us, and I'm happy to turn to Melody too, if you have a opinion or a thought on this, or Rachel. I don't think we encourage isn't the right word, expect or support participating community foundations or foundations that have kind of adopted this model to share it with their partners within their systems. To me, the framework in and of itself is systems change. we put it in the one block of influencing public policy and systems change. But to me, amplifying community voice, insisting on racial equity, those are activities of systems change. So I may be kind of conflating or putting together parts of your question. I would say that those community foundations that are further along in their journey have probably externally and outwardly communicated how they are going about their work in terms of community leadership and the variety of activities that they are undertaking. So I'm not sure if that gets to what you're asking. And Melody, I don't know if you would have anything else to add, or Rachel.
One thing that comes to mind is just, I think, you know, within the framework and within the community leadership assessment tool, there are questions around sort of feedback loops, like how does the community foundation share with the community and vice versa. So I think if a community foundation is doing that well, then there is some sort of feedback loop where they are sharing at least some details about sort of their community leadership approach with the broader community. But I would say that probably looks different with each community foundation. But I think, you know, part of community leadership is having that sort of two-way dialogue with the community in all aspects of their work, including community leadership practices and things like that.
Muchas gracias a ambos.
Thank you. Any other questions before we go into breakout rooms?
I just wanted to lift up Varzy's comment in the chat, because this tool was modeled off of that organizational mapping tool.
Mhm. Yeah, and I know that Varsy, your organization, IET Community Trust, which is a Haitian-led community foundation in Florida, led by people with Haitian heritage, for their population in Florida, but also back in Haiti. And they're a grantee right now of Connecting Communities in the Americas. So yes, we've been hearing about their approach to that.